And all right, we're so glad that you're here. There's no way. I was sitting here last night and watching these folks come by, and for example, you didn't see it, but on the people cleaning the restrooms, they had a little sign up here that said "Bathroom Brigade." You didn't see that. I got thinking. It took us 15 minutes to decide what to put there. Just those words, the Bathroom Brigade. And so many hours, literally thousands and tens of thousands of hours, and nothing has been unimportant. And so we welcome you to the first morning session of our 37th Pastor School.
One day the load was especially heavy on Brother Hyles, and the burdens were many. He had had so many appointments one night, and admitted he rebelled a little bit at having to solve the problems of others when he had so many burdens himself. It was about midnight, and after counseling with many people, he started to go home. But just before he left, he put the following thoughts into poetic verse and entitled it, "The Pastor's Heart."
I have a burden, Pastor, that I'd like to lay on you. I listened, though he never knew I had a burden too. I took a tearful look toward mine, then his came into view. 'Twas plain to see my burden was the larger of the two. I took a tearful look toward mine, then his came into view. Then plain to see my burden was the larger of the two. I saw his load alongside mine, and though they both were real, the yoke he bore was made of wood, and mine was made of steel. To him I said, "Come unto me, I'll gladly carry thine." Then whispered unto selfishness, "But who will carry mine?" I softly laid my burden down to help him his to bear, while knowing that my heavy load I'm not allowed to share. I'll help him with his burden, then regain mine after a while, when I will sigh and weep once more, while now I force a smile. I felt the chains of bondage till a captive came to me and bade me help him break the bands and aid him to be free. I saw the fetters binding him and felt a pity pain, for his were made of little rope and mine of heavy chain. I'll lay aside my heavy chain so he my help may borrow. I'll help free him of bondage now and think of mine tomorrow. A doubter knocked on study door. I had an urge to groan. Why bring your pebble doubt to me when mine are made of stone? I smiled at him and listened while believing in my doubt. I laid it down reluctantly and feigned a happy shout. I sat alone in darkened room and felt the shadow's knife. Another came to share with me some darkness in his life. As I compared my night to his dark possessed a lack. For his was just an evening shade and mine was midnight black. A troubled soul came to my door, a problem to confide. I had a problem too that day, 'twas hard for me to hide. My problem was a mountain steep and his was just a hill. My problem was an ocean wide and his a tiny reel. Yet 'tis my lot to fill his need and put mine on the shelf, for I must lay my heartache down and hide it from myself. He told me of his broken heart while mine was breaking too. I told him of a mending God who maketh all things new. He told me of his thirsty soul. I gave him living water. He said he was a broken vase. I told him of the potter. Another came when I was sick to say he had the flu. His fever was 101 and mine 102. Another weeping seeker came for me his tears to dry. I went alone and wiped my eyes and told him not to cry. Another came when I was tired to say he needed rest. I lifted him with weary arms and tried to give him zest. And now it's late and all have gone, each one to his abode. So I must find my problem and regain my heavy load. Where is the burden I had borne? I had it while ago. Where is the problem I must solve? I left it here, I know. I cannot find my broken heart. Where is my fevered brow? I have a smile, the tears are gone, I cannot find them now. My sickness now is turned to health, and trust replaceth fright. Assurance covereth all my doubt, and my darkness now is light. I heard a voice from heaven say, "My child, 'tis always true. When you take care of others' needs, I will take care of you."
He has riches untold. I'm a child of the King, a child of the King, with Jesus my Savior. I'm a child of the King. I once was an outcast, a stranger on earth, a sinner by choice and an alien by birth. But I'm born again, my name's written down, and there to a mansion, a robe and a crown, a tent or a cottage. Why should I care? They're building a palace for me over there. Though exiled from home, yet still I may sing. Oh, God, I'm a child of the King. I'm a child of the King, a child of the King, with Jesus my Savior. I'm a child of the King. I'm a child of the King, a child of the King, with Jesus my Savior. I'm a child of Jesus, my King.
I'm proud of Jennifer. She's one of my favorite students of voice. I've been teaching her for a number of years, and I'm very proud of her. And I think she certainly is a tribute to my ability to instruct. Thank you. Father, bless us now as we look at this tender subject. Help me to be a help and encouragement to these from all over the country who have come from places of leadership to discuss leadership. And so give us today a little bit of what we need. Amen. Most of the things that I say will be philosophical and not practical. I want to talk to you this morning on the subject, the analysis of a leader. I was at O'Hare Airport about to board a plane on a Monday morning. And by the way, you're going to find very little worth writing down, but you'll find a lot worth listening to. I was at O'Hare Field Airport one Monday morning. I went to the little newsstand to buy USA Today paper. And there it was, right in front of me. And in front of the cash register, there it was, for sale. A little magnet. And here's what it said. A leader is one who hides his panic. A leader is one who hides his panic. And there it was. I purchased that little magnet, brought it back and put it in my desk, in my office. A leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of this verse. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. That means the same temptation that the follower has, the leader has. I've often said that a leader is one who doubts, who speaks to a bunch of doubters, trying to convince both to quit doubting and believe. I read this verse. There is no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. I got on the airplane and I kept that little magnet in front of me. A leader is one who hides his panic. I'm going to psychoanalyze you for a while this morning. You're not all as confident as you act like you are in the pulpit on Sunday morning. We stand up in the pulpit and we say, "Oh, I wish Jesus had come today. Oh, I'd love to see him. I wish he'd come now." And the truth is, if the trumpet sounded, you'd say, "What in the world is going on?" Where? And now, the truth is, a leader is one who hides his panic. As I sat there on the airplane, I looked at that little magnet and those words, "A leader is one who hides his panic." I thought of my mother the morning that Daddy left for the last time, leaving Mother and I alone, Mother and me alone together. I thought of my mother comforting me and saying, "Son, we're going to make it. We're going to make it." In our little poverty-stricken circumstances, my alcoholic dad is gone to stay, and Mother has to take care of a boy and rear a son. I thought of my mother who put her arms around me and said, "Son, God will take care of us. We're going to make it okay." And then I found her late at night on her knees, crying to God, saying, "What shall we do? What can we do?" A leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of that day when I came and found Hyman Appleman in his motel room, famous evangelist, on his face. I do not know what he was talking about. All I know is that he was weeping and shouting as he said to God, "I don't know what to do." A leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of Dr. John Rice back in the days when he and Dr. Bob Jones Sr. were seers foreseeing the tragedy that Billy Graham was going to have when he joined up with the National Council of Churches and everybody else. Dr. Rice was at the lowest ebb of his ministry. The subscriptions to the Sword of the Lord had gone down and down and down. I recall I asked Dr. Rice one morning at the bottom of his life, and at the bottom, I said, "Dr. Rice, what are you going to do?" And with a tear rolling down his cheek, the great old man said, "I don't know. I don't know." I say a leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of Dr. Robertson, who for 1 year couldn't speak. For 1 entire year, he could not preach a sermon, barely even make a few announcements at the Highland Park Baptist Church in the zenith of his ministry there. I thought of Dr. Robertson going from doctor to doctor all over America, trying to find some doctor that could help him preach once again. I prayed with him then. I was with him a lot then. I saw his frustration. I felt his fears. I say a leader is one who hides his panic. I sat there on the airplane as I looked at that little magnet. A leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of walking into my pastor's office in the church where I was reared. I thought about walking to my pastor's office, Brother J.C. Sizemore, during a battle he was facing, and finding him weeping uncontrollably. Absolutely. He did not know I was there, but he was uncontrollably weeping. And then he would come out on Sunday to comfort the people and assure them that everything is fine. A leader is one who hides his panic. I think of Dr. Bob Gray sitting over here right now. wondering how his voice is going to hold out. Wonder if he's going to be able to preach and how long he'll be able to preach because his voice has been failing him. While he stands up and comforts his people and encourages his people and assures them everything is all right, you know how he feels because you often feel the same way. As you say everything is all right, you wonder if everything in fact is all right. Now look, we're not home this morning. We're a bunch of leaders here away, most of us, from most of our followers. Let's face the fact today. A leader is one who hides his panic. I remember walking to the pulpit, this very piece of wood in this very auditorium, 10 days before we were to purchase the college campus where our college is located now from the Capuchin Catholic group. We had to raise $2.5 million. That'd be $10 million today. We were 10 days from it. We'd only raised $1.2 million. 18 months, $1.2 million. We had 10 days to raise $1.3 million. And I fell on my face in my office and I said, dear God, what are the people going to think? What are the students going to think when we have to give up our campus and find out we didn't get the money? What will they think? A leader is one who hides his panic. I remembered a staff prayer meeting after pastor school several years ago. I thought maybe my ministry was over. And we had a prayer meeting after pastor school. And I prayed last, but I could not pray. I remember how that I was absolutely weeping uncontrollably, wondering if there'd ever be another pastor's school. I say a leader is one who hides his panic. As I sat there on the airplane, looked at that little magnet, a leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of the day that Mrs. Hyles was home and I came home and told her the news that we had been voted out of the Southern Baptist Convention. I did not know there was any such thing as independent Baptists. I didn't know there was such thing as anything other. I thought you were a Southern Baptist or you couldn't preach. I thought it was like the American Medical Association. You couldn't practice if you weren't Southern Baptist. They told me that I had to support their cooperative program along with a bunch of missionaries I wouldn't send out to a dog pound. Yes, I would. I'd send them to a dog pound. And they said, you have to support our program and you have to support our schools. I wouldn't send a pedigreed dog to one of them. I may send a Hyles 57 variety to one. But I told them I wouldn't do it. And they voted us out of the Dallas Baptist Association. I thought it's all over. I went home, told Ms. Hyles, we got the classified section of the paper, and I looked for a job, help wanted, thinking I'd have to go and get me a job. By the way, one of the greatest things that ever happened to me was when they voted us out of the Dallas Baptist Association several years ago. I was preaching in Dallas area, and on the way to the airport, I looked up and I saw there the headquarters over there, the Dallas Baptist Association. It was about 5:30 in the morning, about 10 hours before they come to work, and about 5:30 in the morning. And I just stopped and wrote a thank you note and put it inside the door, thanking the Dallas Baptist Association. But as I looked at that little magnet, a leader is one who hides his panic, and everybody here can associate with that. Every parent here has put your arm around your child and said it's going to be okay, and you wondered if it's going to be okay. Every husband here who said to his wife, we're going to make it, you wondered sometimes if you're going to make it. Every pastor that got up and has gotten up and said, the Lord is still on his throne, you wondered if in fact he was still on his throne. Let's unmask today. Let's just unmask and face the fact that we have panic, and yet we have to hide our panic. A leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of my mother kneeling at my bedside when she thought I was asleep the night that Daddy left. I can still hear her prayer. Dear God, I can't be a wife anymore, but I still am a mother. And dear God, I pray you'd bless my boy. She said, I'll try to make him a man if you'll call him to preach. I say a leader is one who hides his panic. I thought of that morning I walked into Lester Olaf's office in Corpus Christi, Texas, when he was at the bottom. I walked in finding him on the floor weeping. Lester Olaf, the man who gets up and sings about faith and as scripture, the just shall live by faith. A giant, and yet on his face weeping in the hour of his heartbreak. That father, the Gibraltar on which you have leaned all these years, has fears and doubts too. That mother who always seems to know what to do sometimes really doesn't know what to do. That pastor who encourages and comforts you sometimes wishes he had a pastor himself. Somebody asked me one time, if you could have one thing you could live your life over, have one thing you couldn't have had, what you didn't have, what would you choose? And I said two things. I'd choose a close friend, and I'd choose to have a pastor. That serene, dear grandmother is often, when alone, fearful of death. That doctor who spends his life improving your health fears often for his own health and dreads sickness and death. Sitting up here often on Sunday morning is one of our members, probably the outstanding heart surgeon in this area. He's the surgeon that performed the surgery for Dr. Bill Burr, his bypass surgery, and many others. Probably the outstanding heart surgeon in the area. I recall one night I was over at a restaurant, and I was walking back to the car, and there was a pay phone there. And this doctor's wife, this heart surgeon's wife, was on that phone frantically talking. And I stopped to listen. They had a baby girl who was sick, and she was weeping, calling a pediatrician, begging that pediatrician to come quickly because she was fearful for the life of her baby girl. A doctor's wife. I saw that same doctor's wife in the hospital while that doctor waited in the waiting room, also fearful and anxious. The man who stands behind the pulpit and calls you to faith on occasion knows doubt in his own heart. That preacher who convinces you that God will supply all your needs sometimes worries about his own needs being supplied. That husband who works to supply your needs sometimes wonder when his chest pain is going to come. That Bible teacher who stands so strong and tall before you falls occasionally on his face with frustration and doubts. That Christian who shouts the loudest about heaven frets on occasion about the vehicle of death that will transport him to heaven. How many times have I heard Bill Burr have a spell because he's thinking about heaven? But he was hypocritical. I saw him at the door. He wasn't nearly as excited about going in as he is when we're in the services here. I saw him awaiting open heart surgery, bypass surgery. And suddenly the golden streets were not quite as appealing as they had been. And the gates of pearl did not have a welcome sign over them. And suddenly he wanted to walk on asphalt instead of gold, and walk through wooden doors rather than gates of pearl, and sing Amazing Grace rather than we're here, praise the Lord, we're in heaven together. I'm simply saying, face it. You know it. I know it. A leader is one who hides his panic. Your counselor longs for a counselor. Your daddy longs for a daddy. Your mother longs for a mother. I kid my doctor, one of our members here, who's my doctor. I kid him. He won't go to the doctor. He says to me, you ought to have a checkup. I said, when was your last one? He says, let's go on and talk about something else. He's as scared to have a checkup as I am. Your pastor wishes he had a pastor. The one on whom you lean longs for someone on whom he can lean. Even Jesus was in all points tempted or tested like we are. Now, then how do these leaders assure us? These who hide their panic, these whose panic is just as real as your panic, and these whose fears are just as real as your fears, and their doubts are just as real as your doubts. How, in fact, do they hide their panic? Easy. They keep on going. They keep on going. That's the way you hide your panic. You keep on going. You see, the leader perseveres while the follower quits. The leader endures while the follower despairs. The leader stands while the follower falls. The leader stays while the follower leaves. The leader fights while the follower surrenders. The leader succeeds while the follower fails. The leader works while the follower rests. The leader runs while the follower stops. The leader advances while the follower retreats. The leader encourages while the follower seeks encouragement. But you hear me carefully, and don't you try to kid me, and I'm not going to kid you. I'm going to unbear my heart to you this morning. We who lead weep just as much as those who follow. Except we hide our tears. We hide our doubts. We hide our fears. We hide our panic. I say the leader is one who hides his panic. And let me say this. If you're going to be a successful leader, you're going to have to weep in the darkness and catch others' tears in the light. You'll have to weep alone and catch others' tears while there are those around. The leader hides his panic. The leaders hurt. They fear. They doubt. They worry. They wonder. They pain. They panic. They fret. They dread. They're troubled. They're anxious. They're wounded. They're injured. They're scared. But the difference between the leader and the follower is the leader keeps on going. He keeps on going. The only difference in Lee Robertson and 1,000 other preachers is that he stayed when he faced the same battle that caused them to quit. He persevered during the same storm that caused them to yield and succumb. Name the great preachers. Name your favorite preachers. J. Frank Norris, over 30 years, pastor the same church. Lee Robertson, over 40 years, same church. George W. Truett, over 40 years, same church. Charles Spurgeon, over 35 years, at the same church. G.B. Vick, over 35 years, at the same church. Bob Gray in Jacksonville, Florida, over 35 years, at the same church. Dr. Tom Malone, over 40 years, at the same church. Name them. Don't you think Dr. Robertson had times where he cried like you cry when you decided you're going to quit? I'm saying this. The leader simply says, by cracky, I'll hurt, but I'll hurt alone. I'll weep, but I'll weep in the darkness. I'll doubt, but I'll hide my doubts. I'll panic, but I'll hide my panic. And let me say this morning, if God's going to use you, you're going to have to get to the place where you cancel your pity party and have it by yourself and keep on going. Just keep on going. They lived, Proverbs 24:16, a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. So the difference is not the feeling. The difference is not the difference in the size of the pain or the hurt. The difference is not a difference between the amount of doubt. The difference is when one person doubts the same as the other person doubts, he keeps on going while the follower falls. He endures while the follower fails. One of my favorite stories. I was out west. A rather well-known preacher. His name is not on the lips of everybody in America, but many of you would know him if I called his name. He said, Dr. Hyles, could I see you after the service, please? And I said, yes. I went to his office. He put his head in his hands like that and began to weep and shake and tremble. And I said, Doc, what's wrong? He said, Brother Hyles, I've got a daughter not married who just found out she's pregnant. He said, I don't know what to do. How can I face my congregation Sunday when my own daughter, unmarried daughter, is pregnant? What can I do? I said, here's what you do. Sunday morning you get up, you shower, you shave, you dress, you eat breakfast, you get in the car, you drive to church, you walk to your study, you get your Bible and your outline, you walk to your pulpit, and let her rip. That's what you do. Within a few years, I was at the same church preaching for the same man. He called me to his office one day and looked at me and said, Dr. Hyles, I don't understand it. I've got another daughter that's pregnant, not married, my second one. And I said, Doc, what in the world are you going to do now? He said, Sunday morning I'm going to get up. I'm going to shower. I'm going to dress. I'm going to eat breakfast. I'm going to go out, get in the car and drive to church, go to my study, get my outline, walk to the pulpit and let her rip. You say, what right did he have to preach that Sunday morning? Same right that you sinners have. I'm saying, I'd like to reach out this morning and tell you, just keep on going. I mean, boy, let the devils in hell attack and let the enemies come and let the heartaches come. You just keep on going. That's what makes a leader. Our leader says, I'll hurt, but I'll hurt alone. I'll cry alone. I'll pain alone. I'll die, but I'll die alone. And then I'll walk to my people and comfort those that need comforting, forgetting my own hurts and problems and sorrows and heartaches. Now let me do the opposite of what I've been saying, because I want to use this as an illustration. You're looking at a man that's afraid. I'm afraid, just like you are. There's no temptation taking you, but it's common to man, and I happen to be a man. I'm afraid. I have a heart condition. I don't know what's going on down there. Say, when did you go to the doctor last? Oh, a year or so ago. I don't believe in going to doctors. Doctors are for women. The last time I went, I didn't like what he said. I'm not going back. But I'm afraid. I don't know what's going on down there. I have no idea in the world. I'm afraid that I might have a stroke. I'm 73 years old. I'm closer now to 74 than I am to 73. I'm the oldest preacher who's ever pastored a church with over 3,000 attendants. Oldest. Every other preacher's either died or retired. Ironsides died when he's about, and I don't deserve you on this list. So happens I stumbled into a church, a big church. Dr. Ironside's about 70. Frank Norris is about 70. G.B. Vick was about 70, 71. Spurgeon was 58. On and on it goes. Never has been a pastor. I'm afraid. I'm afraid for Mrs. Hyles. If my heart problem is a serious one, if I'm taken, I'm afraid for Miss Hyles to live a life alone. I'm afraid for her to not be the pastor's wife of First Baptist Church of Hammond. And that's one reason I keep going, because I want her to keep being the first lady of this church. I'm afraid. I'm afraid for my people. What's going to happen if I step down? This is a monster here. Each of my men is an expert in his own field, but no man here knows all that goes on, all the ministry. That's why I thank God for Mrs. Colston, who'll take my place when I'm gone. The other day, her staff meeting, Miss Colston is the hardest worker I know, but she has a tendency to try to answer all the questions that people ask me at staff meeting, which means that she's a female. And there was a little boy that talked all the time that said he should. His father was a preacher, his mother was a woman. And Miss Colston she sits right to my left in the staff meeting, and her husband, Dr. Johnny Colston, sits to my right. And one day, every time anybody asked me a question, she would answer the question. And I got a little weary of it. And I said, Elaine, would you please shut up? And Johnny said, how did you say that again? I'm afraid this morning. I'm afraid of rest homes. I'm afraid of convalescent centers. I'm afraid of wheelchairs. I'm afraid of walking sticks. I'm afraid of heart attacks. I'm afraid of cancer. I'm afraid of retirement. I'm afraid of being on the shelf. I worry about Alzheimer's disease. I worry about senility. You see, I was there when Dr. Cedarholm turned 70. I was speaking at Maranatha College when he turned 70. I recalled him sitting over here on my right with that stare look in his eye. I'm 3.5 years older than he was when senility came. I'm saying, I'm afraid. But I'm a leader. And I intend to keep going on. I'm a leader, and I plan to endure. I'm a leader, I plan to stay. I'm a leader, and I will not run. I will persevere. Somebody all across the country, people say, who's going to take your place? I said, where am I going? How do you comfort your people? Tell you exactly how I comfort my people. I just keep on going and get so busy. Only time I can stop to think about being scared is during pastor school. Now this week, by the way, I love life. You know that. I love to have fun. Our house, my wife and I, are just a couple of cut-ups. You won't believe it. She's got a sweet little serene look on her face. But she's like Frank Norris said about John Rice. He said John Rice is the kindest and gentlest man that ever scuttled a ship or slit a throat. She had surgery couple of years ago, and so I called her. But she was out of church for 6 weeks, and I'd call her between Sunday school and preaching, and I'd call her right before the service on Sunday night because the doctor wouldn't let her get out of bed for 6 weeks. I got to call her the backslider. Yeah, you're backsliding. Yeah, you're backsliding. So one morning between Sunday school and church, I called her on the phone, and I said, hello. I said, is this where the backslider lives? She said, yes, but he isn't in right now. I get up the other morning and said, I'm going to call in sick. She said, you can't sick. You can't call in sick because you're not sick, but you can call in old if you want to. Honestly, we talk baby talk. We cut up. We laugh. Our house is a place. It's corny. She said the other day, thank God there's no recording machine around here. But now that doesn't mean we don't have any fears. That doesn't mean when she puts her head on my breast at night and hears the heart pound. That doesn't mean she wonders how long it's going to keep pounding. Not at all. What's the difference? The leader hides this panic. I said the leader hides this panic. I said the leader keeps on going. He comforts those, as the poem said a while ago, the pastor's heart. He comforts those who hurt less than he hurts, and he comforts those who grieve are grieving less than he's grieving, and he comforts those whose burdens are lighter than his. But he keeps on going. And in case you want to be a leader, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have to hide your panic. The leader is one who hides his panic. Now this week we're a gathering of leaders who've come to uncover our panic and admit our frailties and learn better how to lead our people so we can go home and hide our panic again, mask our fears, and hide our doubts. So our people at home can feel more loved, better led, and better fed than ever. So the leader must gain his strength from within. He must devise means to stay on top so he can hide his panic. And by the way, most of the time, you hide your panic from yourself. Don't let yourself know the trouble you're in unless you have a pastor's school. For example, I don't read letters from anybody unless my secretary knows they're my friends. She reads them all. What am I doing? I'm trying to hide myself from my enemies. I don't want to know all the troubles. I don't want to understand what's going on. If somebody writes me a dirty letter, I don't want to read it. Why? Because I want to keep an attitude that's on top side. And my secretary has a lousy attitude. How then may a leader hide his panic? A leader is one who hides his panic. How then may I hide my fears about a stroke? How may I hide my fears about Alzheimer's? How may I hide my fears about following the steps of Dr. Cedarholm, who became senile when he had turned 70? How may I hide them? Let me give you several ways. Number one, as I said, you keep on going. You just keep on going. You get up, you bathe, you dress, you eat, you get in the car, you drive to your position at work, you get your Bible, and let her rip. And by the way, you'll be amazed as you forget your burden, as the poem said a while ago, as you forget your burden. When you are lifting the burden of somebody else, you'll be surprised how you'll be hiding your panic from yourself. Next, shield yourself from negatives. Shield yourself from negatives. Don't let yourself be aware. We used to have a deacon walk down the alley with me every Sunday morning and Sunday night. And here's what he'd say. Just as I walked in that door right there, he'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Pastor, I want you to know I'm for you, no matter what they say." I said, "What did they say?" I don't want to know what they said. And by the way, I don't track down every enemy I've got. I don't track down the people that criticize me and try to set it straight. Bless God, I'm too busy trying to help people, encourage people, lift people, counsel people, save marriages, save wayward children, and build a ministry here. I'm too busy to spend my time saying, "Oh, what? Let's talk about it. Talk to somebody else about it. I haven't got time to talk about it." I shield myself. You see, I'm a conduit. He has no other way to pour his love to people except through us conduits. God has no hands but our hands to do his work today. He has no feet but our feet to lead men to his way. He has no tongue but our tongue to tell men that Christ died. He has no help but our help to lead men to his side. We are the only Bible this careless world will read. We're the sinner's gospel. We're the scoffer's creed. We're the Lord's last message written in deed and word. What if the line is crooked and what if the print is blurred? What if our hands are busy with other works than his? What if our feet are leading where sin's allurement is? What if our tongues are speaking of things that Christ would spurn? How can we hope to aid him and hasten his return? Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. There are people out there in the pews that need somebody to encourage them. And there's nobody to encourage them but discouraged people. There are people out there that need someone to strengthen them, but there's no one to strengthen them but weak people. There are people out there that need someone to calm their, quell their fears and calm their doubts, but there's no one to do it except people that have fears and have doubts. And some of us have to rise above the rest of us, and some of us have to hide our panic from our people and hide our panic from ourselves. And the best way to do it is don't you let a bunch of negatives come inside, because when you walk through that door there, you'll be a negative preacher, and you cannot lift your people, and you will not be a conduit through which the strength of God, the love of God, the power of God, the courage of God, the grace of God, and the mercy of God can flow. I was in Bangor, Maine. I was in Portland, Maine at the airport. I was to speak several miles from Portland, and pastor walked with me to the car, put the luggage in the back seat. Before he turned on the engine, he said to Dr. Hyles, I guess you know what happened to the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Bangor, Maine. I think it's First Baptist, the largest church in Bangor, independent Baptist church. He said, I guess you heard. I said, no, I didn't hear. And I said, I don't want to hear. But he said, it's not a lie, it's not gossip, it's true. Never dawned on you that the devil is the accuser of the brethren? The Bible doesn't say he's a false accuser. The devil's not telling God lies about you, he's telling God the truth, and that's worse. I said, don't want to hear it. Well, he said, it's the truth. I said, don't want to hear bad truth. What he said, I'm going to tell you. I got out of the car, opened the back door, got my suitcase, got my briefcase, took off walking back to the airport terminal. He said, where are you going? I said, back home. He said, why? I said, didn't come to hear bad news, came to spread good news. Now, if you want to go around and investigate all the negative things going on in your place, you go right ahead and stir that garbage up and eat that manure all you want to. But let me tell you something. If you're going to build the kind of people that you ought to build and encourage like you ought to encourage and strengthen like you ought to strengthen, you're going to have to keep garbage from flowing through you because you're a conduit. The apostle said we cannot but speak the things we've seen and heard. Now, if we have to speak what we see and have to speak what we hear, then it's our responsibility to be careful what we hear and careful what we see, because what you hear and what you see is coming through you, and I'm not going to hear garbage because I don't want my folks to get garbage. There's a certain man in America, I speak for him often. He's a good man, but he knows every preacher that has run off with his secretary. He knows every negative thing about everybody. And he's a good man, except when I go preach for him, he meets me at the airport, and it's about a 30, 45-minute drive to my motel. I always make an outline of things I want to talk about on the way, because I don't want him to decide what we talk about. That's one reason why that if you eat at McDonald's, you ought to eat in the drive-thru. You guys, you'll do it this week. You'll sit there and you'll listen to garbage. This guy did this, and this guy ran off with somebody, and this guy quit his church. And why don't you just open your Bible and tell them some good news for a change? You are not going to build a church unless you hear what you ought to hear, see what you ought to see, for you cannot but speak the things you see and hear. I walk through that door every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. You look at the guy that's on top. You know why I'm on top? Because I'm careful what I see and what I hear. By the way, I still don't know what happened to the fellow in Bangor. But you do. How many of you, now I won't ask you to do that. That guy that said burn them. He's been running with a bunch of folks say burn them. He spoke what he'd heard. Burn them, burn them, burn them. You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say burn them in Jesus' name. How can I hide my panic as a leader? I hide it by shielding myself from negatives. Number two, I must be self-motivated. May I tell you a little story about what happened to you? You started the church one time, and the first Sunday you had 5 people there. Remember that? One old codger, 3 draft dodgers, and there are 2 retarded children. And boy, you were excited. Remember that storefront building? That tent? Remember? Huh? Man alive, you had started a church. You'd broken your all-time record with 5. And they looked at you with a starry-eyed, imbecilic look. Boy, you were excited. Glory to God. And you kept on being excited. And the crowd grew 10 and 15 and 20. And boy, you were excited. We're growing. And I'm a pastor. I'm a pastor of a New Testament church. And then one day, somebody ruins you. He said, amen. Hear me carefully. Then you, listen to me. Then you transferred your motivation from here to there. Somebody else said amen. Somebody else said amen. And then one Sunday, the amens didn't come. And you weren't inspired anymore. So you blame them. This is dead. What's wrong with you people? You ought to thank God you're saved. Take that scowl off your face and thank God you're saved. I've often said that the first time that you visit the Rocky Mountains, you will enjoy them because of what they are. The second time you visit the Rocky Mountains, you'll enjoy them because of what you are. I'll tell you a story. 40 years and 6 months ago, I became pastor of this church. We're averaging 715 in Sunday school. Within less than a year, we'd grown to an average of 1,100. Less than a year. Everything was booming. Boy, everybody's excited. We'd not been this way before. And running 1,100 in Sunday school, I had a big day with 14 to 1,500, and man, it was exciting. And then came the split. And then came leaving the American Baptist Convention. And then came that Sunday morning when I had to stand up and tell the people we were going to have a vote on whether I stayed or not. And then came the vote. We lost 406 people one Sunday morning. And our attendance went back from 1,100 back down to 700. Now, hear me carefully. Here's where some of you fellows are losing out. The second trip to 1,100 shows your character. It's not as easy to get you folks excited about having 900 when they've been having 1,100. It's not as easy to get you folks excited about a big day to have 1,000 as it was last year, a big day to have 1,500. Now you listen to me. You get yourself self-motivated. Don't you expect your folks to motivate you. That's what you're there for. You motivate them. Quit talking about how dead they are. Find out what depresses you and don't do it. If you ever have a bad day, down at the end of the day, list what you did and don't do it anymore. Study yourself. There are institutions that study people like you. Study yourself. Find out what makes you happy. Find out what makes you sad. If you have a good day, write down what you did and have another one sometime. There's one little thing about this man right here. I'm not a great preacher. I'm not a great pulpiteer. I'm not a great leader, but I know Jack Hyles. I know what makes me happy, what makes me sad. If I want to get mad in a sermon, I know how to make myself mad. There's 3 people sitting right over there. I just look at them. That's all I got to do. But by the way, if I want to be happy, I preach to this crowd over here on this side. Dr. Lee Robertson made a statement about 45 years ago at the Thornton Street Baptist Church, Houston, Texas, when I was just in my 20s. He was in his 40s. He made this statement that changed my ministry. He said, I'm always looking for ways to inspire Lee Robertson. I'm always looking for ways to inspire Lee Robertson. If you want to hide your panic, you're going to have to be self-motivated, know what depresses you, know what encourages you. Bible said David encouraged himself. Number 4, you must not confide in your followers. You must not confide in your followers. We say, where do I go? Where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Needing a refuge for my soul, needing a friend to help me in the end. Where could I go but to the... That's where you can go. Did you ever hear about God? He's the one you speak about every Sunday, but don't know real well. Did you ever hear about the throne of grace? That's not the name of a girl that sings in a choir. The throne of grace. Did you ever hear about it? We say, oh, hey, anybody to go to. Oh, you got the one that go to that is the one to go to. But you must not confide in your followers. Number 5, and I've got to hurry, I've got 4 minutes. Never appeal to the sympathy of your people. They'll follow you about 3 weeks that way. Well, folks, the load is heavy. I hope you're praying for your preacher. Never had a worse week. They'll be Presbyterian. They'll turn on. By the way, the average preacher in this room today, I'd rather hear Robert Schuller than you. At least he encourages people. I feel better listening to John MacArthur than you. There ought to be, I say there ought to be, in every town, neighborhood, village, and hamlet, and countryside in America, a building where a man who knows how to keep himself on top side, who's self-motivated, stands up before the people and says everything's all right in my Father's house. God is still on his throne. And hide your own panic. The leader is one who hides his panic. Number 6, get close, but not too close to your followers. There ought to be a mystique between leadership and fellowship. We'll never have a decent president again as long as they have pictures on television of them running around in their shorts jogging. Let your people know you love them and get close to them, but not too close. I often say to our preacher boys, remind your people that you have feet of clay, but never take your shoes off. And show them your feet. Number 7, bleed alone. Bleed alone and don't talk about it. And lastly, occupy your time with helping others. General Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, was now an old man. His health was failing him. 5,000 people assembled in London for the International Salvation Army Convention. The moderator stood to tell the people, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, our leader and founder, General Booth, is not able to be with us. However, he has sent a telegram to be read at the opening session. In his absence, I read his greeting to you. He opened the telegram, and here's what it said. Dear delegates of the Salvation Army Convention, others, Signed, General Booth. Lord, let me live from day to day in such a self-forgetful way that even when I kneel to pray, my prayer shall be for others. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let this my motto be. Lord, let me live for others that I may live like thee. Listen to me carefully and I'm through. I have every reason this morning, if I wanted to, if I did not know how to encourage myself, to be discouraged. Most of you preachers will never know what it is to have a lawsuit. I have all the time. I've got 3 right now. 3 major lawsuits. If we lose one of them, Mrs. Hyles and I could lose everything we have for our old age. I had to have a deposition. The lawyer sent me a copy of the deposition and said, I want you to read this. I said, don't want to. Makes me feel bad. I haven't read it yet. Don't plan to read it. I won't read his letters. That's why I hired him, to take care of my business. I'm not going to fret about it. Because I've got this many people nearly every Sunday morning sitting in these pews with heartaches and problems and burdens and sorrows and doubts and frustrations. And there stands a man before them who has burdens and doubts and frustrations and heartaches and problems just like they do. But one of us is going to have to rise above the rest of us and hide his panic. A leader is one who hides his panic. We'll come back in 1 hour at 10:40 for our next session.
Upon hearing of the death of one of our good members, Mr. Charles Foreman, Brother Hyles wrote a poem entitled God's Other Side. Mr. Foreman had been blinded in World War II and had lived for years without his physical sight. Brother Hyles read this poem at his funeral. His chisel sculptures mountain peaks, his pitcher pours the lakes. 'Tis through his brush the rainbow speaks, his fury spawns the quakes.
Yet he sees the tear which scalds my cheek and notes the drooping shoulder. He hears the sigh when I am weak and knows I'm getting older. 'Tis the other side of God.
His power sends forth the snowflakes like tiptoeing drops of rain. His breath sends forth a gentle breeze to resurrect the grain.
Yet he holds my restless soul at eve and feels my heaving breast, while whispering gently to my toil, come unto me and rest. 'Tis the other side of God.
He carved the gorges into view, while morning stars did cheer. He placed a 7-colored hue and made the bow appear.
Yet he tiptoes gently to the grave and stands beside me there. He whispers o'er the surgeon's knife, my child, you're mine, I care. 'Tis the other side of God.
'Tis God whose mighty voice I hear in thunderings overhead. Tornadoes are his footprints, spring winds his gentler tread.
Yet he makes the old to pass away and maketh all things new, then bends his ear to us below and whispers, I love you. 'Tis the other side of God.
Oh, I'm sorry. We paying you just to do that, but not much, right? Out. We have a deaf and dumb ministry here. Our deaf sit back there and the dumb work up here on the platform. And I wish I could tell you of my admiration for the young man who's about to talk to you. Here is a product of the First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana. Dr. Ed Lapina came to us when he was 4 years of age. He went through all of our school system, our First Baptist, Hammond Baptist schools, Hyles Anderson College. He's one of our boys. Not only was he trained in our schools, but he was trained at our church and grew up here. I do not know a finer man or a wiser man, nor do I know any man that has done more to make this pastor school a reality than Ed Lapina. This is a conference on leadership. It may or may not be exactly what you thought it would be, but what you hear will make you a better leader. I've often said, what you are is more important than what you can do. For if you are what you ought to be, you will do what you ought to do. And what you believe is more important than what you do, because if you believe right, you'll do right. And you're about to hear one of my dearest friends, like my own son, talk to you about leadership, Dr. Ed Lapina.
Thank you. Let me ask you to turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 13. I'm going to give an illustration, and then we're going to go to an area on leading young people that I think is very important. If your church is a growing church, if it's an exciting church, if it's becoming stronger, it's got to have a lot of young people in it. If your young people are happy, the adults are going to be happy. If the young people are growing, the adults will grow. If the young people are dissatisfied and they don't like what's happening, they don't like what's going on, they're not challenged, they're not led properly, you'll lose your adults. And they will, because they'll not be happy. Let's just face it, most adults will pick a church so their young people can be helped. And if their young people are not being helped, they're not being trained, they're not being challenged and led properly, then they'll find another place that will. And it may not even be another place of sound doctrine. It just may be of another place where the young people feel challenged and feel led more than where they're at. So I want to help you today, and with some thoughts and then some ideas for you. Acts chapter 13, look in verse 2, please. As they ministered to the Lord and fasted, the Holy Ghost said, "Separate me, Barnabas and Saul, for the work whereunto I have called them." Notice something here. Barnabas now is with Saul. Saul, who was saved on a road one day heading to persecute Christians. And God changed his life, gave him a new identity, and turned him into a preacher. And God gave him a new name. However, right here, he is not called by the name that God gave him. God knew what Saul was going to be, and God called him Paul, because that's the name that we would all know him by, and the world would know him by, and that's the name he would attain to one day. But right now, he's with Barnabas. Who was Barnabas? Barnabas was his mentor. Barnabas was his teacher. Barnabas, for a period of time, was the one who trained him to become Paul. Look, if you would, in verse 8. But Elimaeus, the sorcerer, for so is his name by interpretation, withstood them, seeking to turn away the deputy from the faith. Then Saul, who was also called Paul, filled with the Holy Ghost, set eyes on him, and said, "O full of all subtlety and all mischief, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, wilt thou not cease to pervert the right ways of the Lord? And now, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thee, and thou shalt be blind, not seeing the sun for a season." And immediately there fell on him a mist and a darkness, and he went about seeking some to lead him by the hand. Then the deputy, when he saw what was done, believed, being astonished at the doctrine of the Lord. Now, when Paul and his company was loose from Paphos. I want you to notice that statement now. Now, when Paul. Back up in verse 9, it said, then Saul. But in verse 13, it's now all of a sudden, Barnabas calls him by his attained name of Paul. And now, throughout the rest of Scripture, if you look at me for the next few moments, it is Paul and Barnabas. It is no longer Barnabas and Saul. Paul had become the leader. Barnabas had become a co-worker, and in many senses, the follower. The area of leading young people probably is maybe the most misused and the misguided area of leadership that I know of, and maybe the most abused area of leadership in the world. Our young people will one day become us. They will one day become what we are. They'll one day take our places. I find in most churches, young people have leaders over them but are not going anywhere. They're not being trained. They're not being taught. And they, for all lack of other terms, I don't know what else to call us sometimes, but religious babysitters. To where we have a group of young people, a group of people that will become our deacons. They'll become our song directors. They'll be Ray Boardway, chairman of our deacon board, was a teenager here in this church. I was a teenager in this church. And one day, those kids will one day become co-workers. They'll become leaders. They'll become pastors. And we ought to lead our young people to something. We ought not just babysit them. We ought to lead them to something. I want our young people to go from becoming kids to becoming parents. I want our kids to become moms and dads one day. Our children will one day be bosses. Our cheerleaders will one day be wives. Our Blue Beret, our service groups will one day be mothers. Our athletes or our basketball players or our soccer players, they will one day become men of God. And that ought to be in our thinking. Let me give you several points to explain my thoughts. Number one, our followers will become our leaders. They will become our leaders. And we've got to have, when we lead our teenagers, we lead our young people, we've got to have that kind of thinking. We can't just say, well, let me just have an activity, or let me just have this program to fill the kids' time. It ought not have that purpose. It ought to have the thought, you know what, I need to train these young people because, you know what, they will become our leaders. And if I may, you can't stop that. They are going to grow up. You grew up. No matter how much you wanted to stay a kid, you still had to get older. You still had to age. You still had to become a husband. You had to become a wife. You had to become a boss. You had to become a manager. You had to become a preacher. You know, you became leadership. And we must realize that our followers will become a leader. Number two, don't just lead, train. Train. Don't just be their leader, be their trainer. And lead with that purpose in mind of training. Now, training is tough. I heard Tom Landry on a radio station here in Chicago many years ago now. I heard him make this statement. They asked him, Mr. Landry, what is your definition of a head coach? And he said, a head coach is someone who makes his people do what they don't want to do so they can achieve what they want to achieve. He's a trainer. He wasn't just a coach. He just didn't have a bunch of players trying to play a game. He was a trainer. He put football into their mind, into their life, and trained them. And training is difficult. And that's the area where we're messing up on. We are not training. We are babysitting. We have a few things once in a while for the kids and hope that they'll all of a sudden become everything that they need to become in life. We hope that at the marriage altar, a good wedding ceremony and a little challenge from the preacher will make them a good husband or make them a good wife. Or we think that maybe, a year or two in Bible college might just do the trick to make them become a man of God as they should one day. No, it's a process. Training is a process. It's not done overnight. It's painstaking work. It's hard work. It's difficult work. The average tenure of a youth pastor is a year and a half. You know why? Because it's hard work. It's not all just ball games and fun. It's hard work to train young people if you're doing it right. If you're training kids for a purpose. Number three. And I just mentioned the word, your purpose, and that's an important word here. Should be to train the follower or your followers to take your place. Your purpose should be to train your follower to take your place in life. Of course, I'm only 40 years of age, and to a teenager, that's old. To me, that's fine. I don't mind being 40. I don't feel old. Times a little tired, but I don't feel old. And I'm not thinking about dying, but I got to realize one day I will. I got to realize that one day I won't have the opportunity to work with kids anymore. And you know what? They will then be working with kids. My son, my daughter will be adults one day. So I've got to train them. I've got to lead them and train them with the purpose. You see, that purpose in mind, that one day they will follow me. One day they will be head of a household. One day they will be head of a group of people, a youth group maybe, a church maybe, a Sunday school class, a bus route, doesn't matter. They're going to have somebody looking up to them one day, and so they will take my place in life. And that's a heavy responsibility. And that's something we take very casually and very lightly. Well, let's just have something for the kids. Let's let them grow up. They're going to be fine out in the world. They're going to be, you know what? The kid needs to learn life on his own. And, you know, without any guidance, without any training, our social, our politicians are offering social programs or midnight basketball and things of that area to where they're providing areas of time just to keep kids out of trouble. That's not my purpose. My purpose with the youth group is not to keep kids out of trouble. It's to take kids from point A to point B. Now, I'm all for keeping them out of trouble, but the idea and the object here is not just to occupy space and time. There are a lot of people in life that do that. There are a lot of adults in life that just occupy space and they just take up time. But their productivity in life as a leader is very shallow. And it's very self-serving. They're not helping others. They're not progressive. They're not leading other folks to do the things that they ought to do in life. Listen, if I can make a kid productive for God, I've done something with my life. So my purpose is to train them, and I have that thought, that purpose in mind, that one day these kids are going to be youth pastors. One day they're going to be assistant pastors. One day they're going to be preachers. One day they're going to be moms. One day they're going to be cheerleading sponsors. They're going to be Sunday school superintendents. And that's the thought that I have. I don't look at a kid and say, you know what, I hope he becomes a good citizen one day. No, I've got in my head that he's going to be something for God somewhere, somehow. So I've got to put the qualities in him to do just that. Number 4, and this is very important to me, and you may not understand it at first, but don't exploit a follower. Brother Hyles preached last night that his philosophy is not to use his people to build his work, but his work to build his people, and he's done that. I find that most leaders will build their followers' strengths instead of training that follower on how to use their strengths in life. Let me give you a couple of examples. Dennis Rodman. How many of you know who I'm talking about? Raise your hand. All right. You've all preached a sermon or two on him, haven't you? And you've all probably wondered where or how does a Dennis Rodman come to be? How could a man with so much ability and so much talent be such a loser? I'll tell you how. I'll tell you exactly how. One day, he picked up a basketball, and he bounced it pretty well. And a coach saw him in junior high and said, son, you want to play some basketball? He said, yes, sir, I would. He said, son, if you ever want to get out of the ghetto, you need to be good at that. And one day, maybe you can get on a varsity basketball team. And you know what? He worked at that. And that coach probably trained him, thinking, you know what, I'm going to get this kid on a varsity ball team, be on the starting 5. And that's where he went. Straight to high school, straight to the varsity, straight to the starting 5. He was somebody. King of the campus. Everybody's darling. I mean, probably didn't have to work hard at school, classes. But he was the coach's prodigy. The coach looked at Dennis Rodman and said, you know what? I keep working with this kid. I'm going to get him a scholarship. Hey, Dennis, you keep working with me, and I'll get you a scholarship to a top university. And he did. And he did. And Dennis, you keep working. One day you get that scholarship to college ball. You know what? You'll one day you'll get in professional basketball. And you'll be a star. You'll be a millionaire. And you know what? All these things flooded his mind. And his coach drilled him and trained him and exploited his strength to where he did become a college ball player and a professional basketball player. And he is a good basketball player. He is. I've seen him play in person. He's amazing. I would not want to play against him. He is an amazing, strong athlete. But in every other area of life, he stinks. That coach, if I were Dennis Rodman, I'd go back and find my 7th grade coach and deck him. Said, you taught me how to bounce a basketball, but that's over. You taught me how to thrill a crowd, but that's over. His basketball career's over. He doesn't know how to be a husband. He doesn't know how to be a parent. He doesn't know how to be even a good citizen. I mean, we're talking about a man that's younger than me whose life is shot. He's shot. All because somebody took his strength and exploited it. Instead of using that strength to help and apply it to other areas of life, saying, yeah, Dennis, you're good at basketball, but in the character you get from basketball, let's apply it to other areas of life. Instead of teaching them how to be a decent person, instead of teaching them how to study, instead of teaching them how to say yes sir, no sir, and respect other people, instead of getting them into Sunday school, but no, he probably played ball on Sundays. He probably went to tournaments on Sundays and never got involved in Sunday school or church. He was exploited. We look at somebody who's dead now, but another area, somebody who was exploited, a Liberace, for instance, a musician. Fella died, many believe because of AIDS, but no, it was no secret he was gay. A miserable existence, but the man could play that piano. And what happened to Liberace? The same thing happened to Dennis Rodman. He found a music teacher that told him he was great and would let him play the piano hours upon end, but never taught him any other area of life. Never trained him to be a man. Never trained him to walk and to talk and to sit and to speak and to handle himself like a man. Never trained him in other areas. Never allowed him to develop in other areas of life. You take a kid that scholastically, he's got a high IQ. He's brilliant. His IQ is way up there. And we think, well, son, you got a high IQ. You need to study. You need to learn. You need to read books. You need to prepare yourself. And maybe you'll get a scholarship to college on an academic scholarship. And boy, he does. He gets an academic scholarship. And maybe he gets a scholarship to MIT or Cal Poly or some place to where he can then go on, become something great, a scientist, maybe work on a space shuttle one day. And all of a sudden, he is used in the one area to where he's brilliant, but you know what? He can't walk out of the building and find his automobile. He's so brilliant, he can't relate to his own son. He's so bright and so intelligent, he can fly a man to the moon, but yet he doesn't know how to handle a discipline problem in his home. You see, he's exploited. Another area, you got a fella that's in your youth group, excited about serving God, loves the Lord, soul winning, on fire for God. I mean, he carries a King James Bible everywhere he goes. I mean, he walks like the pastor, talks like the pastor. I mean, he wants to be the next pastor of your church. And you're proud of him. But then all of a sudden you start exploiting him. You throw a basketball at him, he looks at it and watches it hit him in the face. He may be spiritual. He may know how to pray, but he doesn't know how to get along with other people. He doesn't know how to talk to other people. He doesn't know how to obey his mom and dad. He's a 15-year-old evangelist that can't clean his room. He can't play basketball. The other kids make fun of him. You see, next, make your young people well-rounded, which fits in with this. I don't want our kids to become experts in one area. Brother Hyles, the more you get to know him, the more you're going to find out he's an expert in a lot of different areas. You know, he's got a high IQ. He's got 141 IQ. But yet, you ought to see him play with children in Bible school. You ought to see him mess around and play with the teenagers on Saturday. He can relate to all different age groups, yet you put him in the room with a scientist, he can handle himself in that area as well. He can preach to great crowds, or he can teach a small Sunday school class. You throw him a basketball, he can shoot free throws with you, and probably as good as any kid in this room. He's an athlete. He's a preacher. He loves music, and he can sing, whether you believe it or not. And I mean, he has a lot of areas in his life where he's well-rounded, and that's what I want our kids to be. I want our young people to be well-rounded. And in doing so, and listen carefully to this, I have to allow them to be around other people other than myself. I've got to find other leaders out there that he will look up to. You know, one of the areas that we are so laxed on is this area of jealousy. Can I tell you something? There's no room in the Christian life for jealousy. Sometimes I think us preachers think that God's going to give us a free pass on this area of jealousy. We want everybody to serve us. We want everybody to love us. We want everybody to take care of us. But yet when somebody else, or when one of our people takes care of somebody else in our church, the little green monster comes up. An area of jealousy for youth pastors is Christian schools. You know, they don't have to come here, meet, preach, or teach, but they got to go to school. And can I tell you something? I can't compete with a basketball coach. I mean, that basketball coach has a group of fellas that'll worship the ground he walks on. He can make them run, he can make them work, he can make them sweat, and they'll say yes, sir, and do whatever he says. I tell them to come in a room, they look at me funny. And I wish they loved me as much as I love the coach. Can I tell you something? I need that coach. Many years ago, I realized, you know what, I think I can turn out a whole lot more kids if I had the help of other leaders. And I could turn out better, more rounded, or well-rounded kids if I had the help of an English teacher, if I had the help of a music teacher, if I had the help of a basketball coach, if I had the help of a choir leader, if I had the help of a Sunday school teacher, if I had the help of a preacher. If I had the help of a principal at school and a principal in our junior high as well as our high school, you know what? If we all work together, we could turn out a pretty well-rounded young person. To where he gets into life, you know what? God can use him more than he could other kids who are tunnel-focused. They're only good in one area. Just think if Dennis Rodman had become a good Christian. Just think if he had learned how to use music properly. Just think if he'd learned relationships, how to have proper relationship with a woman and a wife, and to be a good father. Just think what he could do or could have done in life. But what happened was he had one person who was his mentor, and that was a coach. That coach probably wouldn't let him go to other areas, wouldn't let other people work with him, wouldn't let him go to Sunday school, wouldn't force him to work in class, and wouldn't let him look to other leaders. He probably just tunneled that kid just to himself. You see, the thing is, you need to make your young people well-rounded. Allow them other leaders. Listen to me, I want the kids to learn English. I want them to learn music. I mean, I don't want to, my son many years ago, actually, I think he was 4th grade. He's 7th grade now, but it's 3rd or 4th grade. We were sitting at the supper table on a Tuesday night, and my wife said, Matt, your choir is singing tomorrow night in church. Now, he didn't like choir. He didn't care for it at all. Didn't like to sing. And all of a sudden, he looked straight up. He looked at me. He said, Dad, help. And I thought for a moment, you know what? You know, I lead a high school choir. I want you to sing. I was kind of mad for a while. And I said, no, you're going to sing. You're going to be in choir, and you're going to stand up there, and you can do what you're supposed to. He came up here and walked up on the platform with his choir to sing, and I got to chuckle a little bit because he wasn't real happy about it. But then I got thinking, you know what? Maybe I ought to be a little bit glad about that. I want him to sing. I want him to enjoy music, but I don't want him to enjoy it too much. I mean, I might be a little bit worried if he said, oh, goody, 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 we need to sing tomorrow. Then I might be a little bit more worried. I want our kids to appreciate music. You know, you basketball coaches, I'm going to allude to sports a lot in this because it's very fitting, but yet it explains myself really well here. You basketball coaches, you know what? You ought to allow other programs and other people to affect your athletes. Your athletes ought to be in choir. Your athletes ought to be in church. You know, there's nothing any sorrier to me than to see a kid build up his life or body and build his strength to where, you know, he thinks he's the next Charles Atlas, but he stands there in church and folds his biceps, and during the song service doesn't sing. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. There's no room for jealousy. And the problem with you allowing other workers to work with your young people, it's a jealousy problem. You don't want anybody to touch your prodigy. This is your kid. You can take the principals of our school, and I don't believe I've ever heard Mr. Vogel or Mr. Boyd or Dr. Sisson, I don't believe I've heard any of these guys ever say, my school. And I don't believe they've ever heard me say, and if they have, it was a mistake, heard me say, my youth group. This is our youth group. That's our school. These are our kids. They belong to Brother Hyles. They belong to their parents. They belong to God. They belong to the science teacher. They belong to the coach. They belong to the youth pastor. They belong to the Sunday school teacher. And I this summer, I counted over 40 people or different programs that a young person in junior high or in high school will be involved in by the time he graduates from school. So he's not just mine. He's not just Mr. Vogel's. He's not just Mr. Niemeyer, a Sunday school teacher. He's not just a superintendent. He's all of ours. And in doing so, with proper leaders and proper coaches and proper teachers and proper musicians, teaching and building and allowing other areas to come into this kid's life, you know what? We're going to lead that kid to be a leader one day. And we're going to train him to one day take over a position, and he's going to have so many different avenues and abilities that his bosses are going to be so proud of him, thinking, wow, can I tell you something? Our kids, they graduate from high school here, and they get secular jobs. These guys don't want to get rid of them. You know why? Because they can administrate. They can organize. They know how to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am already. They got intelligence. They got bright. And these employers are offering them big-time money. I'm talking about 18 years old to stay with them, offering them scholarships if they would go to college and then come back and work for them. You know why? Because we're turning out well-rounded kids. Perfect as teenagers, not by any stretch of the imagination. Because they're going through training. They still get demerits. They still get spankings. They still get in trouble. But we have an organization that trains them to be well-rounded. Next, apply training and strength building to life. Apply training and strength building to life. You say, what do you mean? I coached wrestling for 5 years at Hammond Baptist High School. I wrestled in high school myself. Dr. Larry Staub, who teaches at our college, was my wrestling coach. I became the wrestling coach several years ago and took the team because Dr. Staub was involved at the college and other things. I'm no longer the wrestling coach. One of my wrestlers is now the wrestling coach. Now, while I was a coach, and I remember and I learned this from Dr. Staub when he was a wrestling coach. He'd sit us down in practice as I sat down my wrestlers in practice, and now the coach sits down his wrestlers in practice. And we apply that sport to life. Let me give you an example. We had a tournament one time. One of our wrestlers was wrestling in a tournament, and a champion wrestler. In his weight class, he was the best, no doubt. But in a tough match, preliminary match, he made one mistake, lost some points, lost the match, and ended up having to fight for third place, and did take third place. He was dejected, had a third place trophy, didn't get the first place trophy. He was upset. He was down. The next Monday at practice, I said, called his name. I said, you lost a tournament because you made one mistake. I said, because of that one mistake, you will never have a first place trophy that year from that school. And that'll haunt you the rest of your life, but if I may, that's just a trophy. I said, the older you get, the more one mistake will cost you. You make one mistake when you're married, you can lose a wife, not a trophy. You make one mistake at a job, you can lose a career instead of a medal. And these are things, I believe in sports. I love sports. I believe 95% of our sports programs, however, are turning out junk. Have exploited their kids. You taught them a sport. You've not applied that character that they learned in that sport to life. And that's the key. A friend of mine who's coaching down south was excited because one of his football players was getting scouted by Florida State. He was so pumped and excited about it, and I wasn't real thrilled. He said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Well," I guess if one of my athletes was deciding on going professional, I'd probably feel like I disappointed my preacher, my God, and that boy more than any other person. I feel like an absolute failure." He said, "Why?" I said, "That's the last place I would want a kid to be. Why would I want a kid to live his life in that realm?" Well, there are Christian athletes. How often do they go to church on Sunday? "Well, I know so-and-so's got an unbelievable testimony." I think he'd have a better one in church. And for everyone you can find, I bet I can show you a whole lot more who don't. And I bet in professional sports there are a lot of people who are saved, who are living whoremongering kind of lives because of the influence. But nevertheless, I believe that the sport ought to be training young people, and the program ought to be training young people to apply everything that we train them to life. You know, if your sports program is not training young people to serve the Lord, then your sports program stinks. Go home and give yourself a test. How many of your basketball players go to Bible college and give their life to the Lord full time? How many of them? Take a count. So, well, Brother Eddie, that's God's doing. No, it's your training. It's your training. Listen to me. Kids will become what they've been trained to become. I've spoken at some of your camps and so forth, and several of you here. I remember when your churches were started, a camp in particular. Several churches got together for a summer camp, and it was their first year of their churches in down south, and your kids were pretty rough. But over the period of a few years, I watched your kids upgrade. I watched the young ladies know how to comb their hair, walk and talk and act like ladies. I watched the fellas, they didn't have that worldly look. Their hair was combed nice, and they were talking different, and they were singing loud and strong. You know why? Because you had a program that trained them to do that. You saw these City Baptist kids the other day. You know why? You take their peers in Chicago, they don't look like that. Why? Because God came down and said, "Poof, I'm going to make you different"? No, because they were trained and their character have made them different. They had teachers at school. They had afternoon program leaders on Sunday. They had bus captains and workers that paid their tuition and worked with them on Saturdays. And they had all kinds of people helping them, and preachers preaching to them to train them to know how to stand and sing gospel songs and enjoy it and love the Bible and want to give their life to serve the Lord full time. Take a test. If your kids feel like their future's in the sport, then you failed. That's why I like wrestling so much. There's no future in wrestling. None whatsoever. Kid graduates from high school. If he does go to college, after that, there's still no future there. I mean, a group of guys don't even get together and say, "Hey, let's go down to the park and wrestle." If they did, you don't want to go, okay? It's not where we live. But there's no future in that sport. The only future is in the character that we put into the athlete. You see, we have the future. The future's in him. The only future I got from high school wrestling was the character that it taught me. That was it. And our sports, our training, our young fundamentalist programs, our youth activities, our school classes, we ought to have that in mind. That the future is in the character, in the discipline, in what Brother Hyles said a few moments ago, in helping a person to become what he ought to be. That's the future. Next, preach to strengthen their weaknesses, not just to point their weaknesses out. Preach to strengthen their weaknesses, not just to point their weaknesses out. And I'm all for telling it like it is. You come to our youth conference, we'll have this room packed far more than it is right now, and your kids will get some of the hottest preaching they've ever heard in their life. And we'll point things out. But they'll also find that the preachers that I believe in our youth conference will preach not just to be mean to them and not just to tell them how wicked they are, but because we want to help them. If a young person feels like the pastor or his teacher or his mentor wants to help him, wants to train him, you know what? He's going to go a whole lot further. And he's going to feel like, you know what? All right, this guy's helping me become what I need to become. I don't like running staggers in basketball, but that coach is helping me to become a good basketball player. I don't like not being able to go to the movies, but you know what? The preacher, he says I shouldn't, and maybe I'll just obey him. I don't agree with him. I don't like it. But maybe I'll just obey him because you know what? I think he really cared. He'd be disappointed if I went. Number next. A follower properly trained will never feel qualified to take his mentor's place. He'll never feel qualified to take his mentor's place. However, he will have the character to do so. He will have the character to do so. Let me back up to the sport of wrestling again. Dr. Staub, as I mentioned, was my wrestling coach. I then coached, and I remember when I took over the wrestling squad, I went to Dr. Staub and said, man, you got to help me. I said, I know how to work with kids, but I've never coached the sport before. And I went to some other coaches, and I watched coaches. And I learned, I mean, I was totally dependent upon these guys because I didn't feel qualified. But I believed the character had been instilled in me to do the job. Brian Hassey, one of my wrestlers, is now our wrestling coach and teaches in our high school. He coached this year. Called me, Brother Eddie, now you got to tell me, this is what I want to do. What do you think? Very nervous. Now you're going to be out there every practice. I said, I'll be out there a lot, Brian. I can't be out there a whole lot. The truth is, I was hardly out there at all because I knew he had the character to do it and did. And all the while I'm thinking, this is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. Trained properly, he didn't say, all right, Lapina, you're out, I'm in. Let me show you how to do it. He said, man, I'm in. Will you help me? And even after a year, I feel he's got a tremendous handle on it and can do it all by himself. He still says, now you're going to help me next year again, right? And you're going to help me more than you did this year, right? No, I'm not. He's on his own. But the truth is, listen, he can handle it. And that's what we want. We want our fellas to get out there and to be husbands. Yet we don't want them to think they're God's greatest gift to women. We want them to be parents, but we don't want them to think that, you know, they never need us to ask our advice. And see, how do they get that? Preachers, listen carefully. I'll tell you how they get that from you. How do you treat your mentor? Well, I graduated from Hyles Anderson College, and I studied 4, 5, 6, some of you 10 years under Dr. Jack Hyles. But I want to tell you something. I don't agree with him in every area. Well, you know what? You probably don't. But there is a junior you around that's listening to that. And one day when he needs you and he needs to obey you when he don't want to, he's going to remember your words about your mentor. And I believe with all my heart, one of the areas where we are destroying our kids is in the area of loyalty. We have no loyalties. You may not agree with Jack Hyles and everything, all right? So what? Shut your mouth. You will do more by shutting your mouth and being loyal than you will by voicing your opinion and feeling like a man. Because those kids that look up to you, they're thinking, wow, you know what? He loves Brother Hyles. And you know what? He goes to pastor school and he sits there and, man, he just listens to everything he says. And he comes home and says, man, this is what Brother Hyles taught. This is good. This is a lesson I learned in college from Brother Hyles, greatest man I ever met. I mean, they hear that. You know what? They are being trained now on how to be loyal. But they hear you get up and they say, well, you know what? I don't always agree with him. It's the same thing you preach to your parents on what not to do to you. I told him a dad the other day, I said, you know what, you got a daughter and a couple sons at home, and when they hear you say, you know what, Mr. Boyd's a good man, but he made a mistake in this area, you are demising authority. And guess what you are? You are authority. And one day when your daughter or your son gets to the point to where he feels too big for his dad, he's going to demise authority too because he saw you do it. He watched you. You taught him. You trained him on how not to be loyal. You trained him on how not to follow the leader. I believe properly trained and properly taught, a follower will one day take the place in life of leadership equal to or surpassing his leader, his mentor. Can I be honest with you? I hope every one of our teenagers, whatever I've done in life, I hope that every one of our kids do more than what I've done. I hope that I help instill the qualities in them from myself, from Brother Hyles, from Mr. Boyd, from Brother Vogel, from their teachers, from their Bible teachers, their Sunday school teachers, and to where they can go out and do far more in life than I ever dreamed of doing. That's what Paul did. That's what Paul did. That's the idea. That's the purpose. That's the goal. And if they're trained properly, you know what? They will never forget those who trained them. They will, and that's got to come from you as well. That area of loyalty. I sit over here on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. And I've been in this church since I was just about 5 years old. I was 4 years old, turning to 5. And I watched Brother Hyles absolutely adore the predecessors in this church, his predecessors. I've watched him uplift his pastor. I've watched him uplift his mother and his Sunday school teacher. In fact, the whole country in fundamental circles knows of Brother Hyles' mentors. Why? Because he's been loyal to them. He's been loyal to them. And you know what that teaches us too? That teaches us to be loyal to those who've taught us. Next, develop and organize programs that teach and train. Develop and organize programs that teach and train. I was at a boys' home last spring. The director of the boys' home said to me, he said, Brother Eddie, he said, I'm a little alarmed at something. And I said, what? He said, you know, in the churches we travel to and we get boys from, he goes, I find out in most all of them, they have little to nothing going on for the teenagers. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they're fundamental Baptist churches. Some of them are famous preachers even. Some of them, you know, have preached even at Hyles Anderson College Chapel, but yet they got absolutely nothing going on for the teenagers. And I'm thinking, man alive, if that's happening, and I started watching, and you know, I find that to be the case. Mrs. Evans called me about a month later. She says, Brother Eddie, every church I've been to in recent months, they have a problem of losing teenagers. She said, why is that? And I said, what kind of programs do they have? And she said, hardly any. I said, well, that says it all. Teenagers got to have something to do. They got to have some place to go. And they got to have someone to lead them there. And without any kind of a program, what's a program? A program is an organized area of events or activities that teach and train. You got no activity programs. You have maybe a gym night once every 6 months, or maybe go to an amusement park, or maybe hit up a revival service or a conference once in a while. That's no program. Those are parts. You need organized programs with people in charge that train to where the kids got to show up to it every week. Maybe a young fundamentalist program, or maybe a choir or singing group. How about a service group or two, or a club, or even a sports program that's top notch and run organized. You know one of the problems our school has with other schools is cancellation of ball games. Cancellation, and it's a never-ending problem. You know why that is? Because somebody is disorganized on the other end, didn't schedule referees, didn't work calendars. You know, we hardly ever cancel anything around here. I mean, we got to have like 30 feet of snow, and it's got to be like 100 degrees below zero for us to consider it. I mean that. We have had teenage soul winning for well over 27 years, and you know what? We've canceled it probably 5 times because of weather. And we just don't cancel things, but because our program here is a definite organization of scheduled events. On Monday nights, our kids go to singing group practice, from sports practice to singing group practice. And then on Wednesday nights, they go to choir, then to church after going to school. On Saturdays or Friday nights, they got activities or a ball game. And on Saturdays, they got teenage soul winning. And Sundays, they got programs there in Sunday school and church, young fundamentals. I mean, this is stuff that happens day in and day out. And that's why now 75% of our graduates go, or 75 to 85% of our graduates go to Bible college. Because of organized programs. Do you have kids that mess up? I got a lot of them. I'll sell you some if you want. But the truth is, after they go through the process and they become a senior, and I'm talking about as a sophomore or a freshman, they were rebellious and they didn't like church and they didn't like this and that. You know what? They go through a process to where now they find themselves in Bible college, dating a preacher boy. That's because of organized programs, mission trips, conferences, camps, all these things. There's so much that you can do, except you got to get in there and you got to work it. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It just doesn't happen. Next. Make your young people feel accomplished. Make your young people feel accomplished. Offer your kids awards. Praise. You know, a pat on the back sometimes is worth its weight in gold. Sometimes a letter of appreciation may just help a kid to turn around. Sometimes just the acknowledgement that you're there. My freshman year in college, registration day, I swore I was quitting. It took 7 hours for me to go through the registration line. I'm telling you, I was a high school wrestler, popular, but I had tears in my eyes. I got down to, I didn't know it was the end of the line, but if one more person asked me to go back and get something I'd forgotten, I was going to my car and walking away. But I got down, and all of a sudden, a teacher called me and said, Ed Lapina, man, it's good to see you. Man, I almost started bawling like a baby. Man, I had to fight the tears. I was just so glad to become somebody all of a sudden. And just glad I was there. Now that may not be all it takes for some kids, but you know, sometimes it'll help. A letter of appreciation. You know, you can't beat people in the head all the time and get them to come around to loving you. A letter of appreciation, a note, a pat on the back. For the Hyles, just to let the kids know he loves them. They'll beg him for a day off school and he'll toy with them for a while. And you know what? Quite often he'll give in and he'll give them a day off school. Just, you know what? They had a tough week. He said, well, you know, that's not scholastically sound. You know what? That'll help turn out a lot of good kids sometimes. It's not the fact that they got out of school. It's that a preacher wanted to do something good for them. It's the fact that they felt, you know, they crash his office on Saturdays and just beat on his door until he opens his door. And they'll go in, they'll spend time, they'll talk with him, they'll mess his office up, they'll steal things from it, and they'll break things. But, you know, it just lets them know that he's their friend. He loves them. And last, a loss or defeat can be a tremendous opportunity to gain. A loss or defeat can be a tremendous opportunity to gain. There are times, especially if you have a school, you're going to have to discipline a kid. There are times where you're going to have to call somebody down from the pulpit. There are times a kid may mess up his life and fall into sin a little bit. Man, those are primo opportunities for you to jump in and help bring him back. If you never leave the door open, they'll never come back. If you never leave the light on, they'll never come home. You want to lead kids someplace, you're going to have a lot of kids messing up. You better not discard them. I talked to a youth pastor one day. We were playing his school. This is probably 15 years ago now. And I said, yeah, you got a lot of good kids. This was September. We're playing a soccer game. And I said, you got a lot of pretty good kids here. He said, yeah, we got rid of all the kids that were riffraff. I said, well, how'd you do that? And he said, well, during the summertime, we just wrote a bunch of them letters, told them not to come back. We kept all the good kids. And I thought, wow, that's easy. How do you turn out good kids? Get rid of all the bad ones. That's the easy way out. That's the easy way out. But working with the ones that need working with and working with the ones who failed, it's kind of like the story I told about wrestling. After losing a tournament, after losing a match, is primo opportunity to teach and to train that kid in the area of life, to help make him better, to help make him stronger, help make him more alert, to help make him a winner later on. I don't like losing. I despise losing. I'm a terrible sport. I've had to work on myself at handling loss. I don't like it. Never have. And I never will like it, but I've learned to handle it a lot better than I used to. But those losses sometimes help us make us sharper and better in years to come if we're taught. In conclusion, listen carefully. Build strength with a purpose. Build strength with a purpose. Don't just build an athlete. You know what? Make a man. Make a man. We got an awful lot of athletes. We're a little short on the man side. Be an example for them to follow yourself. Be a learner. Be a trainer. Be somebody that is worthy of being followed. Don't be concerned about making your kids into preacher boys. Don't be concerned about that. You just train them to surrender and build their character and strength to handle the call. You just build them. You let God turn them into a preacher. And one day when they surrender, they got the character, they got the grit, they got the stamina to hang in there and to serve God or whatever area of life, to hang in there in a marriage, to hang in there as a parent, as a father, as a mother. I mean, give them the qualities that they need. Let God make the preachers. What do you say we just give God something to work with? Just give him something to work with. Barnabas taught Saul, didn't he? He taught Saul and trained Saul. All of a sudden, they're at a place where this man's ruining a soul-winning opportunity for him. This deputy of this place was wanting to get saved, wanting to hear, wanting to be taught, and all of a sudden, an evil-spirited man, there are a few out there, wanted to cause some grief. It used to be Barnabas that would step in. It used to be Barnabas that would have put the man down, but now it was Paul's turn. He stepped in. He said, knock it off. He said, you're not going to talk like that. This man wants to hear about the Word of God and hear the gospel. And you've been doing nothing but causing trouble. And he said, from this day forward, buddy, you're blind. You're going to be blind. People are going to have to show you where to go from now on. People are going to have to lead you everywhere. And all of a sudden, the follower became the leader. All of a sudden, it was no longer Saul. All of a sudden, it was now Paul, the apostle. Not Saul, the persecutor. Not Saul, the trainer. But Paul, the apostle. Somebody we've been studying about for years now, isn't it? A great man. Greatest Christian probably that's ever lived. But yet, he had someone that trained him. We've got a lot of great Christians that are in the making. They watch us. The lessons you learned this week on leadership, you know what? Learn them. People under you are going to need them one day. Father, we thank you for this time we've had to be together. We thank you for this group of preachers here. We thank you for their ministries to churches all across the country and for being here with us. We ask them to bless them, bless the teachers.